Spotlight TV. I'm your host, Dr. Larry Carnes, and we're excited to have you with us. We have a very special guest with us today. Angela, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
We want to welcome you to our broadcast.
Thank you very much.
Introduce yourself to our audience and tell them a little bit about this powerful book that you have.
Right, my name is Angela Fortnum. I come from Banbury, Oxfordshire, which is in England. I was born here and I've lived here most of my life. I went to school, to the infant school, the junior school and the grammar school, and then I started work in a bank. I've always wanted to work in a bank ever since I was knee high. So I achieved that ambition quite early on in life. I worked in a bank in Banbury from 1965 to 1981. And then I moved to Birmingham in the West Midlands in England, where I worked in the mortgage department.
Okay.
Until 1997, when I took early retirement because of ill health. Excellent.
Now, you have this fascinating book, Pages and Leaflets of Oxfordshire, My Lineage pre-1700 to 1959. And in the book, you share lots of information about your family, and you've done lots of research on your family. You talk about your family history, about your maternal grandfather, and you give us an open window into the life of your family. Share with our audience what you would like to share with them about this fascinating book that you've written.
Well, one of the amazing things is the change in their religious beliefs. From generation to generation, they seem to change from one belief to another. My 7 times great-grandfather, James, was, I believe, a Quaker. His eldest son died and was buried in Ye Old Meeting Yard, which was a Quaker place of burial. I couldn't find anything about my 8th great-grandfather, but I found quite a lot about the subsequent grandfathers. My 6th, James's son John, was baptized as an adult into the Church of England a few months before his marriage. So here's another change of direction. His son, another John, was also married in the Church of England at St. Peter ad Vincula. That's St. Peter ad Vincula translates into Christ in Chains. Something I learned whilst researching this book. They had 12 children, him and Sarah, 6 boys and 6 girls. So quite a family to look after in what was probably a very small cottage. Although I haven't got any evidence to substantiate it, there is one piece of that says he was a parish clerk, i.e. he recorded information in the parish registers, information about birth, baptisms, marriages, and burials.
Okay.
It meant that he had an ability to read and write. He might not be able to spell the names properly because bearing in mind that the people he recorded the information for probably couldn't read or write themselves, so they didn't know how their name was spelled. So
okay.
He did stab at it. I've also got a copy of his will, which was signed on his deathbed and witnessed by one of his daughters and one of his son-in-laws.
That's interesting. So how did you get a copy of the will? You've done extensive research, as we can see. So how did you get a copy of his will?
I went digging through the National Archives, which is in London, found that they got a copy of the will and took a copy of it. There was also a copy of it at the Oxfordshire Family History Society. So I had a translation as well, because obviously, again, the spellings were difficult. So they put it into what I call proper English.
Wow. So how long did it take you to do all of this research to get a copy of the will? You must have, you devoted lots of time to this. How long did it take you to compile all of this?
Well, I started the family research in 2008.
Okay.
I hadn't got a computer then, so it was all pen and paper, flip chart paper, with a pen and a rubber, with a pencil. And then I found it grew too much, so I had to put it onto a computer package.
Yes.
When I got back to James, my 7 times great grandfather, I did stop researching. I couldn't get back any further, and I put it in a drawer. But when my mother died in 2014, she was 97. I picked it up and started again, and did some of the cousins and some of the brothers and the sisters, although they're not included in the book. I then decided that perhaps I'd done all this research, and being an only child, it would go to waste. So why not write a book? There's a book in everyone, so they say, and this is my book.
Wow, that is interesting. I notice here, you talk about discussions of the richness and the diversity of the church. You mentioned several, the church and how through generations, there was some different affiliation with different churches there. You talk about that. And I noticed it talks about, yeah, you covering over 8 generations as you're doing this research. How tedious was it to compile all of this information?
Well, I'm very good at organizing things. So I got myself organized, and I just started with my mother, and I just went to her father, and then his father, and his father, and so on and so forth. And I was fortunate that they all lived in the same village, more or less. All the information was in one parish record held at the Banbury Library.
Okay.
And I just found it. I was lucky.
Yes, you were very fortunate that you didn't have to run all over the place to get the information.
I had to run all over the place to look at some of the burial plots, but because they died in different places, but and some of them there isn't a burial plot. So
you visited each one of the burial plots?
I visited South Newington Church, which is where most of them are buried, and Wigginton, where my great grandfather is buried.
Okay.
And I found some burial stones, some monuments, but for other people, they must have been just buried in the ground because they couldn't afford a stone. So they are lost.
What was it that drove you to embark upon this project? I mean, because it took lots of dedication. What drove you to embark upon it?
Well, my mother used to tell me tales when she was a child, and it got me interested. That was one thing. The second thing is, I live in a market town, and I went to work in Birmingham, which is a big city, and I didn't feel at home. I didn't feel comfortable. So why didn't I feel comfortable in the city? Hence, I looked at my roots, and they were all country people.
Yeah.
I got country in my blood rather than city or town.
So you wanted to get back to your roots, and after you did the research, you discovered why you didn't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Wow, that is amazing. That is amazing. Were you surprised by much of the information that you uncovered during your research?
Yes, I was. I was surprised about the number of changes in religious beliefs. That really surprised me, because I'm Church of England, Mum's Church of England, my grandfather was Church of England, and I assumed that was way back in history until the Church of England was inaugurated. But it's not. There's Methodists, primitive Methodists, Quakers, as well as Church of England.
Oh, so very diverse when it came to religious affiliations
Yeah.
and religious beliefs. So what was it about that that was so surprising to you?
Well, my let me see, just check what he is. My John, my three times grandfather, was a parish clerk,
Okay.
and so that was for the Church of England. But his son Joseph inaugurated a primitive Methodist church. He was one of the people that started it off. So although he was, if you like, indoctrinated into the Church of England, he shifted the vision. Another thing that surprised me was that John obviously could read and write to a fair degree to be able to be parish clerk, but his son couldn't write. He didn't sign his name on his marriage certificate.
Interesting.
So I thought, why was that? And the only conclusion I could come to was he was left-handed. They used wet ink in those days. If he wrote with his left hand, they were going to do writing and smudge it. And I'm left-handed too, so I could actually say, yes, that's possible.
That's quite interesting as you've done the research and you're uncovering, you're getting lots of information, the ability to read, to write, and then you also uncovered how some of the lineage shows that they were not very, now the inability to sign their name, read and write, what would cause that to take place? Was it the agriculture or the type of lives that they lived? So what would cause that to happen?
No schooling.
No schooling. Was schooling available? Do you know, did your research show that there was schooling available?
I haven't delved into that. That's another issue altogether.
Okay. But no schooling, you know, that is quite interesting. But I noticed that you focus on the religious and church affiliation. Yeah. That seemed to have captured you.
Yes, that's the direction I went into.
Wow. Why was that so fascinating to you, and why did that capture your attention?
Well, the church and chapel buildings are a history of themselves. There's a lot of things that have been passed down the centuries, wall paintings and things like that. So what I did was I put snippets in the book to whet people's appetites, and hopefully they will do then their own research to find out a bit more about it.
Okay, okay.
Maybe even come to Oxfordshire, look at some of the churches, look at some of the history for themselves, feel the history.
So as you conducted your research, discovering some things about the religious affiliations, did you find a sense of pleasure from your accomplishments? Of what joy did you get out of embarking upon this project?
I was surprised and amazed and very pleased that I could find out so much about the history and the connections with my family.
Fascinating, fascinating, fascinating. So now, right now, what's the next project? So you're looking at this, I can just sense that there's more that you want to discover. So what is it that you want to embark upon next to discover about your family?
My next book, if I can settle down to write it, will be a relative of John Page, the first, my 6th times great grandfather, to see, because they went to, a relative of his emigrated to Canada. The family emigrated to Canada.
Oh, okay.
So I want to embark on that. That's going to be a bit more hard work.
Yes, because now you're going to have to come across the ocean, across the water to do that.
Don't think so. I don't like flying. And, being disabled, I will find it very difficult. but I have a very good try at see what I can dig up from this side of the Atlantic.
Yes, that seems to be exciting.
I found cousins, so they might be able to help me.
Excellent. Listen, this is fascinating. We have about 2 minutes left. Share some information about how our viewing audience can get in touch with you, how they can contact you.
Well, they can buy my book. This is a paperback, but it's also in hardback.
Okay.
Logging onto my website, www.angelafortnum.com. And if they do order my book through my website, they will get a personally signed copy and a dedication as well.
Oh, that's powerful. So share with them again your website.
www.angelafortnum.com.
That's wonderful. You've been an excellent guest. You share so much valuable information, and I'm sure our viewing audience will want to find out how they can get in touch with you to get that book. Listen, we're so glad that you could join us right here on Spotlight TV. We look forward to you just continuing to enjoy such great authors as Miss Angela. Listen, we want you to stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. We're going to take a break. Angela, thank you so much for being our guest today.
You're very welcome. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
This is Spotlight TV, and we will be right back.